Well, good morning, everybody. It's just come up to 11 o'clock, and I'm Peter Thompson, and welcome to our Future Work webinar. I see we've got quite a few participants, and let me just talk you through first how this works, what's on the screen, and then we can get into the presentation and talking about the changing world of work and its impact on organizations. Just in case you're not familiar with Adobe Connect, which is what we're using today, obviously you can see the main part of the screen has the slides, which will be changing as we go through. My pretty picture in your top right hand corner, and hopefully you can see me and hear me. It's probably preferable to have a set of headphones, which is usually better for hearing, and probably a pair of sunglasses in case of seeing me and my nice bright background. And the bottom right hand corner is, hang on, it helps if we get the videos set up properly. So I believe now you should be able to see me. Apologies, I think we had a slight technical problem getting started. Now, bottom right hand corner is a box where you can put in questions or comments, and that should give you an opportunity as we go through to make any particular comments you'd like to make. I'll get to see them all. You just get to see the ones that you've made as we go through. And I'm not going to spend an hour, which is what we're scheduled for, talking at you. Obviously, I've got a number of slides to get through, but I'd welcome comments, questions as we go through the session, and really get into a bit of a discussion at the end. So you can get typing away as we go through, giving me comments on what I've been saying. And it's interesting that this is a kind of good example of using technology to substitute for distance in true kind of telework style. I'm actually doing this on a laptop from a colleague's house with a nice fast broadband connection. So you don't need a massive studio or lots of facilities to hold webinars now instead of seminars or remote meetings. In Wisework, we have a lot of our directors' meetings we hold over Skype or other links similar to this, where you can see each other, share documents, and so on. So this is a sign of the times, the way things are changing. And that's what I want to do really this morning, is talk a bit about the changing times. This is the first of two webinars, the next one being on the 22nd of March, which are looking at the world of future work and how things are changing. So particularly this one, we're going to talk about the factors that are influencing the world of work. And in the next one, we'll talk more about how that impacts managers and organizations, and more of the practicalities as to how we're going to change the way people work, the way people manage, and the implications for all of us in our work-life balance. Right, so let's get started with the influencing factors today. There are lots of forces making a change. In fact, we've really got an interesting time in history. I guess when the historians look back in 100 years' time, they'll say this is a time almost as akin to the Industrial Revolution. We've got the information revolution and the new millennium, and all this has been hyped up a bit. But the fact is, in our lifetimes, we've seen massive change in terms of demographics, social change. Just taking off the slide, the picture of the female graduates, for example. 50 years ago, university was very much a male preserve. Boardrooms certainly were, and still to some extent are, a male preserve. The whole world of work was built around essentially a model that was men went to work and women stayed at home and had the families. Now there are more women graduating in all of the modern Western economies than men. The quality of their degrees is better, so they're getting higher level degrees. And I saw a statistic the other day that in the UK now, in their 20s, women graduates are now earning more than their male counterparts, which is understandable if they're coming out of university with the better degrees. And so when it gets to family time, maybe the little picture on the top right of the daddy with the kid, what happens? Traditionally, of course, women have gone part-time, have ended up with doing the majority of the childcare, have become perhaps full-time mothers, whilst men have forged ahead with careers. And then coming back into careers perhaps after a period off with bringing up the kids, women have had difficulty getting back on the up ramp again. They've lost 5 years of their career path, and the men have kind of overtaken and gone up. And often this happens, if you think about it, in the 30s, maybe at a time when professionals are going into their first level of management job without getting a footing up the management ladder, and all of a sudden that gets lost if they go for childcare. Well, of course, now what's happening more and more, it's only just started, but you know, the couple, if we have a mother and father with a young baby, sit down and say, fine, you know, who logically should take the majority of the childcare, who maybe should be working part-time, and if the father clearly is the lower earner, then it makes a lot of sense that he should do the bulk of the childcare while the mother goes back to work, perhaps full-time. Still there's a social stigma about that. The daddy at the school gate still gets the occasional funny look. It's getting much less now. And that's a social change that we're right in the middle of. And one of the other key changes, and this has been very topical in terms of people going on strike and so on, is of course the whole demographic picture. We're now living a lot longer. Just without any medical breakthrough, we have, it's now, I think every 4 years, life expectancy goes up a year. So I did a calculation the other day, which was looking at if we started from 1960 and said that people then retired at age, males, they retired at age 65, if they now, since then, were to increase retirement ages in line with life expectancy, what would happen is they now ought to be retiring at about 78 in order to have the same number of years in retirement. So that's what's happening, and that's only going to continue. Another figure I heard the other day is that half of all the people born in this country since the year 2000 are going to live to age 100. And that's kind of frightening when you think about our whole world of work has been built around a model that says you're in education, further education, say for the first 20 years of your life, then you work for about 40, build up a pension, and then retire at 60, 65 as it was, although in the last decade or so, people have been wanting to retire in their 50s in order to have an active retirement. But if then you say you retire at 60 and you live to 100, there's another 40 years being spent living off your savings. You're going to have to save half your salary pretty well to do that, or off the state. Who's going to pay all those taxes to keep all these old people in the manner to which they'd like to become accustomed? And yet we have, you know, public sector strikes because you know, we're adding in 2016 adding 1 year to the retirement age. So we've got some massive changes happening here with demographics, and there's no easy solution other than we have to review the whole concept of work as part of our lives. How does it all fit together? You know, the idea of retirement was great when the state retirement scheme came in 1945, I think it was, as you know, part of the social security system, and the government could happily pay out retirement benefits to people who lived 2 or 3 years and then keeled over. Now it just doesn't add up anymore. So we've got to rethink. And you think about it for a minute as well, that the whole idea of working up to retirement is kind of crazy, that somehow at 64 years and 11 months you're a perfectly active, in fact probably well-paid employee if you've gone up a career ladder, and then the next month you're not worth anything. Why can't we have phased down work into retirement, as opposed to just having a cliff edge retirement with what we have today? And because one of the reasons for that is that the pensions, the financial benefits, just haven't been geared to that sort of work pattern. So having to rethink the whole pattern of work in life. And then the little picture, the bottom right hand corner of the kid with the technology. Of course, now we've got a new generation, the digital natives coming through, who've known nothing more than a computerized world. So we're really facing some major changes in what people's expectations are of work, work as part of life in particular. So let's look a bit more at what technology is doing for us. We've got this new generation coming through who now are this is the Facebook generation, isn't it? Where, I mean, a decade ago we were talking about the Nintendo generation, where people were kind of playing with computer games when they came in. Now we're talking about the Facebook generation, because technology is not just something that people have individually in their homes. It's now a whole social media. It's now a way of people making friends. I mean, if you ask a teenager how many friends they have, they say, "Oh, I've got about 150." You say, "Well, how many have you actually met?" They say, "Oh, about 15." The rest are friends on Facebook or wherever. And but to them, those are real people. In fact, those of you that participate on Facebook, you'll know that people often bare their souls or tell a lot more about their personalities, their interests, their lives on Facebook than they probably would do chatting down the pub over a drink. So there's a whole new world of social contact, which then spills over into the world of work, of course, because work has been and is a place of social contact. When I speak at seminars, sometimes if I have an audience, a couple hundred people, I'll say, right, hands up those of you who met your other half through work. And typically 25–30% of the audience hold their hand up. Then you say, right, now if you never went to work in a physical sense, where would you meet your partners? And of course today the answer is through the internet, whether it's through formal dating sites, obviously, or just through coming across people in chat rooms or wherever. So there's a whole new set of social contacts that people have, which then have to impact work. So I guess I'm not surprised, but I'm disappointed, I suppose, that there's been a real knee-jerk reaction from employers. You have a whole load of them who look at social media and say, "Oh, I'm not having my employees on Facebook all the time. They'll be wasting time at work. They'll spend all day chatting to their friends." And so what happens is that it gets banned at work. And then came across an interesting example while we were doing some research for the book, although we didn't actually write this one up, which was a bank in London where the managers were very upset with their young employees, the new ones, particularly the young graduates, who kind of clocked off at 5:30, whereas the long hours culture was very clear that everybody stayed till 7 or 8 at night. And so a brave manager tackled one of his employees and said, "Look, why do you do this?" And he or she said, "Wow, well, it's simple. Because you don't allow us to communicate with each other using Facebook at work because you banned it, what we do is we go home, we get on our computers, and we sit and chat to each other about social stuff, but quite often about work. We share ideas, and it encourages us to work together. We get to know each other. It's kind of teamwork. Because you banned that at work, we end up having to do it at home." And it's a bit like, banning people from talking in the queue at the coffee machine. No, we're back to Victorian times, where you had to sit there with your quill pen in silence and hold your hand up if you wanted to go to the toilet. I mean, it's that sort of mentality. And in the next session in March, we'll talk more about how, for managers, what practical things you can do to create the right kind of organisation, atmosphere, and culture in order to get round some of that. But the point here is that it's because all this stuff's coming in so fast. Social media wasn't even the vocabulary 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago. Suddenly it comes. Suddenly employers don't know what to do about it, so they say, right, ban it. And fine, it may not have too much of an effect on some people, but on many of the younger generation, it says something about the employer as to kind of, well, what generation are they from? Where are they coming from? So we have a whole set of changes happening here in a shrinking world, a world that now it's so easy to be in contact with the other half of the world, whether we're working in companies that have worldwide contacts, or whether we're just buying something on eBay that ends up getting shipped in from China. The world has sort of genuinely shrunk and has kind of moved on. And often our work practices haven't moved on to the same extent. Companies are quite good. I mean, going back to social media for a minute, quite a lot of companies are using social media as part of their marketing. So they're getting on Twitter and tweeting about their products, getting a following, getting interest. Even now you can follow products on Facebook. You can be a friend of your local beer or something, and you get the kind of marketing stuff. But it still hasn't quite come over into the world of work. We've still got this reluctance. So despite the fact that we're going through now the same sort of change that we went through with the Industrial Revolution, where people came off the fields and agriculture into the factories. So now we should be moving from the kind of factory mentality of the 19th and 20th century into the flexible, free, remote, agile working world of the 21st century. That isn't really happening as fast as it could. There's a kind of inertia in there that we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. Where does that come from? Why is it that we haven't got the world of work following the rest of the social, demographic, cultural changes that's happening? And I suppose here's a cartoon from the book, and it kind of summarizes a bit some of the management attitudes. I'm the boss, you do what I say, and as far as I'm concerned, our work practices are what we've always had. We've done it this way for the last 100 years. Kind of why should we change? And of course, there's some very good reasons why they should change, because they're gonna it's going to be good for business. We'll look at that in a minute. But what we've ended up with is, therefore, people unhappy with work. There are various indices around employee engagement. A number of people run them, and there's now a thing of a happiness index as well. Again, we refer to this a bit in the book. But the conclusion essentially is that in the last 50 years or so, we've doubled real income. So people are financially better off, but actually happiness at work is no better. In fact, in some ways it's worse. So we've, I guess it's very topical with bankers' bonuses and so on. We've focused on financial rewards at the expense of personal rewards, work-life balance, and so on. There's a number of surveys showing that people at all sorts of levels in the organisation are saying, yeah, of course I'd like more money, but if I have a choice of more time or more money, give me an extra week's holiday or give me extra £1,000 or whatever pay, I'll take the holiday, because I don't absolutely need the money. I'm not on the breadline. But I am on the breadline in terms of the my time. I'm just starved of enough time to spend time with the kids. I only get to see them at the weekend because they're in bed by the time I get home. I really need more holiday. I'm stressed out. And it's part of this long hours culture that we've got in place, where the people who are looked up to in the organisation, the senior managers, the directors, the people who are setting the example, are saying, work hard, long and hard, and that's good for the business. Yet we all know that in the end, that's not good for the business. And it was at one of the banks, Lloyd's, recently, where the chief executive had to take time off for being too stressed out. And I think that's a good sign. Not that people get stressed, but the fact is that they're recognising that just working like crazy isn't necessarily a good thing, particularly at senior levels, because it sets completely the wrong example for the culture. And so we end up with a situation where people are just stressed out. We get this vicious circle. So they're not working very effectively, but they then try and put in extra effort to compensate, and they get more stressed out. And instead of stepping back and saying, can we work smarter, not harder? It's the same old phrase that was used in advertising by BT a few years ago. Why are we working this way? We've just got ourselves into this rut, and we're ever going downwards. And because one of the reasons people say today is, well, we're in a recession, people have got to work extra hard, they're lucky to keep their jobs and so on. And actually, I think it's the reverse. I think we're in tough economic times. It's a time for stepping back and saying, is there a smarter way we can get our work done? Do we really want to continue to have people nose to the grindstone, stressing themselves out, trying to do the old inefficient way of working but just harder, as opposed to stepping back and saying, is there a smarter way of doing things? And for some organisations, because they've really been up against it, they've had to step back and say, look, it's no longer business as usual. We can't keep cutting costs. I'm pleased to see a number of bits now of the public sector that have often been traditionally quite slow at moving, have got to the stage where they're saying, next year we have 25% less money than we do this year to spend on everything, including paying people. We have no choice but to get our public services done in a more efficient way. And how do you do that? You've got to step back and say, let's be fairly radical about what we do. It's no longer just extending the existing ways of doing things. And so across all sectors, we're now seeing, I think, people really revisiting the world of work, saying, why are we in this long hours and stressful situation? Why is it that we've got to a lowering of productivity? And one of the answers to that, which we've come across, is the whole model of hours-based work, of presenteeism, of being seen to work hard, of rewarding effort, is one of the key things that's kind of gone wrong. And it's really stupid. You think, I had a plumber come fix a leak in my house a couple of months ago, and I thought it would take him about an hour to do it, and it took him 3 hours in the end, and I don't think he was particularly good. I think he was messing about and so on. So he gives me the bill at the end, and I rather reluctantly pay him for 3 hours work. And I think, if he'd been a good plumber, he'd have done it in an hour, and I'd only be paying him a third of what I paid him. But then, if I'm paying him by the hour, where's the incentive for him to speed up? Actually, there's every incentive for him to slow down. And you look at most employment situations, that's exactly what we do. We pay people by the hour. If you work part-time, you get paid pro rata. And so it's all to do with measuring input. You pay your solicitor per hour. You even may pay your management consultant per hour. Yet that says nothing about the output. And so the fundamental question, what's wrong with work, is that we've equated work with effort and input instead of equating work with output. And so one of the things we'll look at again more in the next session is how do you measure output? How do you actually manage people to get work done as opposed to people to just put in effort? And then we reward productivity. And part of that is, of course, this whole area of more flexible working. If you have an environment where individuals can choose when and where they get the job done, then as a manager, you can't stand over them anymore if they're working away from the office or at times when you're not there. You have to rely on managing the results. You have to measure what they do. You have to know what it is they're supposed to achieve and end up measuring that. So we really need to kind of stop and think about, is our model of employment one that is really one we want to continue with, or do we want to have something that's more like self-employment, perhaps, as a new model of work? And part of this, of course, goes around what we've known for the last 50 years. How do you actually motivate people? How do you get people to perform above and beyond the kind of mundane things? How do you stop people just clock watching, just doing the 9 to 5, just following their job description, just working to rule? Well, whether it's McGregor theory X and Y, whether it's Hertzberg, or all these kind of motivational theorists, for the last 50 years have all been saying, well, it's to do with empowering people. Nice overused word. It's to do with creating an environment where people feel valued. It's to do with giving people freedom of choice, giving people autonomy. We have lots of kind of rather perhaps overused phrases describing this new world of work. But that's the theory. That's what the business schools have been telling us, the gurus have been telling us, people have written books about. Yet, when we came to write up kind of case studies in the book of people who've kind of taken this on board, it's a surprisingly few companies that really, not to mention public sector employers, that have kind of genuinely taken this to heart, who've really said, right, I empower employees. It does actually mean give them power over what they do. It does actually mean trust them. You get the extreme examples of companies that say, fine, every employee can write their own job description and decide what they get paid, and it's a complete democracy and everybody has a vote on everything. That's kind of one extreme. Through to the other extreme, the traditional company, which is top-down command and control, and you do what you're told and you salute or you're out. And we're seeing a shift from the old type to the new type, but it's very slow and cumbersome, and it's so easy for managers to drop back into the command and control habit. Why am I here? What am I valued for? Why am I needed in this organization? Oh, well, it's to tell people what to do, isn't it? I mean, my job as a manager is to manage. That means get results. And I think for the inexperienced manager, that's get results by telling and setting goals and standing over people and watching what they do and instructing them on how to do it. And it's the perhaps more mature, braver manager who actually recognizes that their role in getting the best out of people is, yes, to be clear about what's needed in terms of results, but they're not tell them how to do it. Give them the freedom to choose the way they get the job done, and obviously when and where they do it to fit in with their lifestyle. And so we're looking at the way that organization cultures can start to change to meet what the motivation theorists and the leading companies have been doing for a while, which is really kind of investing in their people and identifying those cultures that get the best out of people. What we did in the book was came up with a model of kind of two extreme cultures, what we call a type A and a type B. Very imaginatively said, right, type B culture is one that is empowering people, trusting them, giving them autonomy and responsibility. And Type A was the traditional command and control environment where you do what you say, you're lucky to have a job, traditional management attitude. And we did a survey of about 350 middle managers taken from alumni from the Henley and Cass business schools, and asked them, where was their organisation currently on this kind of scale from A to B? Was it towards the command and control versus the empower and trust? We had 25 different factors in this model, and we asked, where do you currently fit? Where would you like ideally your company to be? And on every one of the factors, the ideal was further towards B. They wanted people to be given more freedom. They wanted people to have more power, control over what they did. They wanted people to be more trusted, and so on. So there's a kind of recognition there amongst perhaps a slightly biased sample, because these tended to be business educated managers, people with MBAs, but nevertheless people who probably spent a bit of time thinking about what management was about, saying that their current organisation was one that wasn't really where it could be. Now, the question is why, if there's a recognition as why aren't they changing it? What's not happening? And there's something called organisational inertia. It's kind of, we've always done it this way, or the senior managers expect us to do it this way. That it's a bit of a brave middle manager who stands up and says, "Hang on, wait a minute, we're doing it wrong around here. I'm not going to hold these monthly meetings anymore. I'm going to tell my employees they can come to meetings if they want to, and they don't have to if they don't." It's perhaps a brave manager who says, "I don't want my office anymore. I'll sit in open plan." If the culture in the organisation is one that senior people show their importance by the trappings of power because they've got a bigger desk than everybody else, it could be career suicide for a lot of people actually trying to change the culture from inside. So what do? You even if you think it could be done better, you say, well, little old me, not going to change this big corporation, and so you end up with it being left as is. Maybe now, with the kind of recession making people stop and think, maybe now with a young generation coming through questioning some of the work practices, that's going to change more. But there's still a lot of Victorian 19th century management practice when you stop and think about it, about how hierarchical, top-down command and control a lot of our traditional management practices are. And a lot of male-based behaviour in terms of boardroom power struggles and so on. But in fast-moving parts of the economy, of course, the up-and-coming, more flexible organisations are going to be biting at the heels of the big, more established ones if they can't adapt their organisation culture to the needs of the 21st century. So culture is a big word, and it's quite difficult sometimes to define it. So, as I say, what we did in the book was came up with 25 factors, things that are with management processes, decision making, and the values of an organisation, to try and define it a bit more. And again, next time we'll go into the kind of the management practices that support the Type B culture in a bit more detail. Okay, but sort of summarising what that culture is about, it's really about letting people go. It's about allowing people freedom. It really is in trusting people. You say to all sorts of managers, "Well, do you trust your people?" "Yeah, well, of course I do." You say, "Well, if they went and worked from home and you never saw them, would you trust them?" So, well, I don't know. They might be watching television all day, or can I let them go, or don't they need my guidance? And there's quite a big gap between often the kind of the values of an organization, say we value our employee, the plaque on the wall, the mission statement with the values of the company, or our people are our most important asset, blah blah, the words spoken by the chief executive, which are supposed to be motivational, and actually have the opposite effect, because people at the coalface know darn well that they're treated like dirt by their manager, or they're not allowed any freedom, or their views are not respected, and it's a kind of hollow promise. So we're saying that the type B culture is one that does actually respect individuals, treats people like adults, I suppose. I mean, the bottom line of a lot of the management processes we're talking about in this world of future work, it's kind of common sense, in that it is, if you treat people like adults, then they'll act like adults. They will take responsibility. Take the risk of giving people freedom and seeing how they flourish. A very few people may abuse that risk, or may struggle with the given freedom if they've always been used to being told what to do. But the vast majority of people will flourish and will use that freedom to become more creative, to have a better, more balanced work life, be more productive for the employer, and things like employee turnover will go down, absenteeism goes down, and all these kind of fringe benefits from giving people that freedom. So one of the key messages in the book is about forget flexible working as a benefit, which is the way it's been publicized by everything from government legislation through to HR policies. Yes, that's all very nice for employees. It's all good for work-life balance. What we're talking about here is a business strategy that involves having a management culture that is productive, that gets the best out of the human asset. I always think it's a bit of a joke sometimes, where we've taken what used to be the personnel function, changed the name on the door to human resources, and then not actually treated that like a resource. Any other business manager has a responsibility for a resource, whether it's buildings or manufacturing or other part of the business, would say, yes, what we need to do is invest in this resource and get a return. And what HR is not good at doing is looking at that business benefit and saying, what is the return on our human asset? We often have trouble, say, justifying the investment in something like training. Where's the return on it? If we can measure the return in productivity, because people are now better able to do their job, then it's pretty obvious that invest in somebody to give them more skill and they apply that skill to work, it comes back to benefit the employer. That shouldn't be too difficult to prove. Proving that people being given freedom to work in different ways turns into something more productive is perhaps a bit more of a leap of faith. Although again, in the book we've referred to our research that's looked at that, including a piece of research I did for the Telework Association, where we did a survey of home workers and showed overwhelmingly that the productivity of people working from home versus working in the office was a massive improvement, and an amazing number of people could put a percentage figure on it as well. So we're quite surprised at the number of people who were able to say, I'm 50%, in many cases 50% more productive at home than in the office. So we've got a kind of a need really to look more at the benefits of this stuff and not just see it as something that's nice to do, an HR policy, a social benefit, or whatever. And then, what does this mean for managers of the future? They said, here we are, my picture of a future manager, sitting there, smile on her face, feet on the desk, probably very bad ergonomic position for working, by the way, but who's got a workforce of people working for her who are out there doing the job, and she doesn't have to be standing over them. I mean, this is almost the opposite of, isn't it, the traditional view of a manager, which would be male, middle-aged, standing with a virtual whip in his hand, over people sitting at rows of desks beavering away. This is actually empowering for managers, but of course it's threatening. Letting go of my power, because I can now, I've empowering my people. Something we all talk about it in kind of almost can be threatening and disempowering for managers. So it can be seen as a bit of a threat. Okay. I've been talking for about 40 minutes, so and what I've been doing obviously is giving you a flavour of some of the things that are in the book, and a little plug here for the conference about the book on April the 24th in Birmingham. That is going to have Alison and myself as the authors speaking, plus a number of other people who are kind of case studies, good examples of organisations actually doing it. This and the next webinar kind of lead up to that. Obviously, if you want to learn more, A, come to the other webinars, B, of course, buy the book. So now's an opportunity really to get into a bit more of a discussion about what I've talked about. I've got one or two questions coming in already, so let me have a quick look. So first question here, somebody saying, I said there were not a lot of organisations doing it in terms of future work and new ways of working. Kind of what are the others doing then? And I suppose the simple answer is not a lot. If you can continue to get away with running your business in a traditional way, and you're not being too threatened by the competition, or you're not having your government grants cut back to whatever, change. People are averse to change. I'm comfortable. I've run my business this way for the last 50 years. Why should I change? Kind of thing. And as I said, it's in some ways it's a brave middle manager who is going to stand up and say, I now need to do something different, set the organisation on a different path, do my bit to change the organisation culture. So we've often found it takes us a catalyst at senior level, ideally the chief executive, but certainly an influential leader who's kind of respected for running a part of the business, say. Quite often if the head of HR comes in with a suggestion about how we might change the organisation culture, it's seen as a bit of nice to do thing for employees. Whereas if it comes from one of the senior directors, then it's obviously seen more as something that is real part of the business and isn't just being done to kind of keep employees happy. Although sometimes line managers are very bad at seeing there is a real connection between happy, motivated employees and the bottom line and productivity, which kind of, when you stand back, is pretty obvious. But when you're at the coalface, busy trying to get stuff done, with customer pressures and business pressures, all the rest of it, it's actually quite difficult for managers sometimes to see. And so getting them to stand back and take a more objective look at the way they work around here is sometimes quite difficult. And so the answer to the question is yes, people end up doing what they've always traditionally done. Okay, right. Looking around my other list of questions, there's one saying, about productivity. What percentage of people, what the percentage increase in productivity? Okay, the particular survey we did of home workers, 85% of them said they were more productive at home than they were in the office. 10% said they were about the same, and only 5% said they were more productive in the office than they were at home. Now, okay, it was a sample of people who were established home workers, so one would expect that probably to happen because they'd obviously got into a pattern. So there would be other people who maybe have tried home working, it doesn't work. And I think the last thing I'd want to do in promoting telework well, with my research hat on for the Telework Association for a minute, is say that it suits everybody. No, the home working is not right for those people whose home isn't a good workplace. If you've got screaming kids, interfering neighbours, nowhere, no privacy, then, or even a lousy broadband link, then it may not suit, or just not enough space. Students sharing a flat, probably just wouldn't have enough space. But somebody who's in a family home with a spare bedroom or a study or something, then it may well be. On the other hand, if it's a family home, they've got the family children around it interfering, then it may not be. And so I wouldn't ever get prescriptive and say home working is good for everybody. I think what's good for everybody is allowing them choice to work in the situation that is most productive for them. There's an interesting book written by somebody called Cynthia Froggatt, or Cindy Froggatt, called Work Naked. And it's a slightly provocative title, but it makes the point about if you're working at home, who cares? Assuming you haven't got the video camera on, of course. And she makes the point that people, depending on your personality, you have a particular way you like to work. Some people like working in conjunction with others in a busy environment. Others like peace and quiet, are much better at getting on working on their own. Some people go mad if they're stuck at home for more than 2 or 3 days. We saw this in when we had the snow recently, and people ended up working, being forced to work at home whether they wanted to or not. People were going stir crazy after a couple of days, wanted to get out and go and see somebody if they're not used to doing that. And I think it's a fairly odd personality who actually wants to just sit in their own company day after day, week after week. Most people like human interaction of some form. So, just finishing up on home working, for those people that we did interview, did fill in our survey, about half ended up saying yes, they could measure their improved productivity. And so to answer the specific question that's come in, and of those, about half again said that they were 50% or more productive. So that's a quarter of the whole sample, saying that it's not just like 10% improvement in productivity. We can really get an hour and a half's work done in an hour at home because, and we asked the question why, and they said because we don't have the interruptions, we don't have to go off to sort of as many meetings, we're saving time and stress on travel, and there was a little element of we appreciate being trusted and given responsibility for managing our own time, so consequently we kind of go the extra mile as a result. Okay, I've got this is great. I've got questions coming in thick and fast. Next one's around managers who become direction givers and leaders. Somebody else's words. And how have they made that transition? Obviously from the traditional command and control through to becoming leaders. Interesting question, because it varies depending on how they've done it. Partly sometimes because of an intervention from education, management training, where people have been taught this is what you ought to be doing, and they stopped and thought about it. But very often from some sort of a catalyst. We found there's a lot of examples where there's been some sort of a change. Organisations moving buildings, say, they recognise that it's an opportunity to save on real estate, to introduce hot desking, to go down this kind of flexible, agile working route. And they realise that therefore managers have to change, and they stop and think about, is this a good example of a way we could manage differently? And so it's often some sort of catalyst, but usually supported by somebody from senior management who says, this is a good thing. It's not just some sort of spurious HR initiative, but managers get encouraged to move more towards the empowering style, and so on. Right, next question around teleworkers apparently will often work long hours. How do you get around that one? Good point. One of the things managers have to watch is the danger they often think is that we're going to end up with people Skyping, people won't be working very long hours. And in practice, it's actually the reverse. People, partly because they're dedicated to the job, appreciate being trusted, but also partly because there's no physical separation between work and home in the way there is with commuting to and from the office. And so they do tend to perhaps overwork. And of course, how you avoid that is managers being aware it's an issue and looking out for it, and then not checking up in the sense of phoning every 5 minutes, but talking to their employees about how it's going, and being sensitive to the fact that they, if they are always sending emails at weekends or when they're on holiday, just sitting down with them and saying, how is this affecting you? Do you think that you're overdoing it? Bearing in mind, back to my point about measuring output rather than input, my productive plumber was the one that got the work done in the shortest time, not the longest time. So you have a culture that actually encourages improved output and shorter hours, because that's the most productive person and get the job done fastest. Then you get out of this long hours culture, which is one way of getting the things done. Okay, next question. My goodness, they're coming in thick fast. Right. Right, what do you think? Hang on. Okay, well, there's a question here saying, what's the next step? We've implemented home working and have had a great response to this within the company, but what's next? So this is somebody whose organisation is already doing it. I'd say, yes, if you've implemented, your words, home working, is that simply because a few people are being allowed to work at home, or have you made a more fundamental change in the way that people are managed? Is it, have you implemented it for everybody? Is it still seen as something that's a bit unusual? Do people who kind of skive off, see my word, skive off at sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, gets comments from their colleagues saying, you're going home early today? Or is it genuinely an output-based culture, management practice? So sometimes home working gets implemented because, we have to for legislation, so we do it for the people who are carers. We better do it for other people if they ask, but it's not really encouraged. And so I would say, yes, if you've implemented it, have you done it for everybody? Is it really encouraged? And is it part of a broader culture, which is to do with the whole changing management practice and so on? Okay, let's have a look at one from somebody who's joined us from Germany, actually. Right, so this is somebody saying, it's an interesting one here. Would a person who's a self-motivated person have a different CV? Would they likely to have different talents? Okay. Interesting. It's all part of the same question. Do you also talk with HR managers and recruitment people about being more tolerant towards people with kind of different CVs? Yes, I think we're still in a situation where sometimes HR people can be perhaps unconsciously conventional. They reinforce people with traditional values patterns. Their model of work is still around the kind of the physically based, office based or workplace based full-time employee, a lot of the policies were all written around that, and the kind of home worker, the teleworker, the flexible worker is still kind of seen as the exception. But I think as we move to a world where work is definitely seen as something that is more virtual, then I think we will be looking at the CVs of people and saying, yes, how much does this show? How much does it actually show that they are more self-motivated, more able to work independently? I mean, we talk about empowering people. That's fine for those people that naturally get up and do things. I mean, we're saying the fundamental principle is people are to some extent self-motivated, but sometimes that has to get encouraged. If people have been working for the last 20 years in an environment where they do what they're told, and that's it, to then say, right, you've now got freedom to choose just how and when you work, never mind other aspects of how you get the job done, you end up with a problem with the whole work model. I'm not going to be able to cover all these questions as they're coming in because we've now got about 5 minutes to go. So I'm just quickly looking through. There's another interesting one here. How do you reinvent the chit-chat element of working together in the same place? So this is an aspect of the social aspects of work. And I think it's very important to remember, perhaps we'll cover this a bit more in detail in the next session, to remember that work is a social activity. It is, people make friends, as I said before, make friends through work. You have the coffee machine chat. People generally work together in teams with colleagues. But think about, what do we do in a conventional office environment? We say, well, you sit in this room with these other people. They come and go about the same time as you. So kind of when you need to kind of collaborate, sort of get on with it. So it's sort of teamwork by accident almost. And you probably find you quite like the person sits at the desk next door. So you come in the morning, you chat about what you saw on television last night. You may end up going down the pub for a drink after work or having lunch together or something, but that just happens because it kind of happens. It's not designed. Now, if you get the situation where people are no longer sitting next door to each other and accidentally bumping into each other, you kind of got to think about, how do I, as a manager, recreate that social environment? How do I actually get people to work together in teams? And of course, they will make friends when they get the opportunities. You don't have to force people to like each other, but making sure that there are opportunities where people are in the same place at the same time to face socialize, and you encourage that. So you have a team meeting down the pub once a month, and everybody gets a good time to chat. Or these days, of course, using social media. As I said earlier, a lot of companies banning the use of Facebook and so on, yet that's a good way of getting people to share ideas and have casual conversations. I suppose the key here is recognizing that people working together need to talk about all sorts of things to get to know each other, not just about work. And so allowing people the freedom to spend time doing whatever they want to do, on the understanding they're still going to get the job done because you're measuring output in the end. Okay, we're coming up to time. I'll just take one last question because somebody's been reading the papers today. In the press today is a report that Bristol intend to follow Nottingham in making employees pay £1 a day to use a parking space at their office. What impact, if any, do you think this will have on the spread of remote working? That's quite an interesting one. I hadn't read the article. Yeah, I don't think it will have an impact. I mean, they're obviously, I guess, this is typical of, as a local authority, assuming that's what it is, saying, right, we want people to be more green and travel in public transport, so don't use your car, so we'll kind of penalise you. I think it will have an impact in encouraging people to think twice about, do I need to travel to work? Not just will I catch the bus, but do I need to be there at all in the first place? I think it's often something like this, which is a trigger that is enough to make people rethink their current work practice. And I guess that's what this session's really been all about. It's about stopping and thinking about, have we really got into old habits? Are we doing things that were more appropriate in the 19th century? And let's get round to getting into the 20th century, kind of thing. Well, it's come up to 12 o'clock and our time's up. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for those questions I did get to answer, and thank you for those I didn't get around to answering. If you've got a particular burning question, please email me at the email address that's now on the screen. Do have a look at the websites, and do join me again on the 22nd of March. I think it's 3 p.m. if I remember correctly. And do have a look on the WiseWork website for more information about the seminar or the conference in Birmingham on the 24th of April. Thank you very much for participating, and enjoy your future working. Bye for now.